Good day guys, so welcome to part 2 of my comprehensive PvP guide for Gunslingers. So today we'll be talking about skills, its corresponding runes, and other special tips for all of us Gunslingers. Arguably, the importance on the mastery of skills, and to an extent the runes you have for your skills, has a greater impact than having the perfect gears. Personally, I think the item gap between players is rapidly closing in. So the longer the game goes on, the more even the gears will be. To get ahead of the competition, mastery of skills is the way to go. By the way, I won't be discussing on the Tank Reflect build 1.0 since I don't think it's any good unless you incorporate the cooldown reduction to it. Now without further ado, let's get right into it. To start off with the Tank Reflect low cooldown utility build, for skills to level, if you don't see the skills listed down below, please do note that you only need to get the minimum amount to satisfy the prerequisite for the next skills. For the Gunslinger skill tree, prioritize maxing Fallen Angel and Bulletproof Armor. Smoke Bomb to level 2 to 5, depending on your preference. Pistol Mastery and Magic Bullet are just for prerequisites, but you can dump your extra skills here. For the Rebellion skill tree, prioritize maxing Rifling Upgrade and Debilitating Shot, given that the build is a switching between pistol and rifle. The next priority is to max your buffs, take cover, and two-sided coin. The rest of the skills are now open for Flashbang and Grenade Launcher to decrease its cooldown. For the manual skill slot, this will work the same way with all the builds. I separated it into two sets, one for offensive skills and one set for defensive skills. Sometimes there can be exceptions depending on what is comfortable to you. For auto skill slot, I placed the bounty skill here for easy debuffs. This skill is good on auto since it has a long range of 10 meters. For my prepare for elite, the skill you should be careful in using here is your fire on full power, since it's crucial for the build and has a big cooldown. So in general, the skills you want to spam the most are Fire Rain, Force Dispel, and Bounty. You can pause the video here and read all of my tips. I think the most important here is prioritizing your Force Dispel to debuff classes that are reliant on their buffs like Divine Avengers. Once they're debuffed, it renders them a bit useless. Do note that Smoke Bomb doesn't get revealed by spells like Sight or Ruwak as shown in this video. Here we continually get hit by the Ruwak since we're staying invisible the whole time. Just pray that the enemy doesn't have True Sight Relic. Now the logic for Reflect build is that the tankier you are in terms of reducing the damage taken, the less return damage you do to the enemy. So here's a video for a quick look on how good Reflection is. We see here that I have 13 stacks of Platinum Era. I'm taking no damage from my enemy and I'm also not returning any damage back to him. So this is the normal setting of the Reflect. Once I'm taking damage, I also return damage, like so. But we tested it again and for some reason it may be a bug or I'm not sure about what's the logic behind it. I'm taking no damage because I have Platinum Era, but my enemy is taking damage. Me and my friend decided to investigate more and we found out that the reflect damage from this bug is not from the Maya card but from the wind reflect card for the armor slot. I'm not sure if it's just a bug or it is actually legit. The next important tip is to always synergize with your teammates. You're not supposed to get solo kills or any kills at all for that matter. The highest priority in most cases is to effectively use your Fire Rain to destroy Earth Field and other fields. Last but not the least, Flash Grenade skill is an underrated skill. It's actually very good for GVG if you want those attacking your Imperium to miss by 80%. Now this is how it usually goes when using this build. Usage of Bounty and Force Dispel on single targets, and then usage of Fire Rain and Flash Grenade on multiple targets. Please do note that Smoke Bomb will fail as a skill if your Fire Rain is still raging on, like so. For the rune suggestions in this build, let's start off with the Doomsday Fire Rain rune. Obviously, since we're a tank build, we really don't need the damage. For tactical maneuver, the cooldown aspect of the second line is not really needed that much, since we're already on a low CD build. Then for fatal shot order, first line is good for helping your teammates kill the target, and second line is good for weakening your target's damage output. In my opinion, the third line actually sucks. The way it works is that if you cast bounty on a target and you kill the target, you alone get the benefit. On the other hand, if a teammate kills a target with bounty, you and him both get the benefits. I think it's a really mediocre third line unlock. Now for the Fire on Full Power rune, one of the most underrated runes, you actually need both the second line and the first line to be really high for it to work. For the Potent Hormone rune, the healing is insignificant. What you need here is the second line for abnormal status resist, and obviously the more important one is unlocking the third line. It acts like an anti-fatal food. You still need to be careful though, because sometimes if the damage is too fast, it won't pop off automatically like in this video. For the last rune, you can go Nano Armor, or you can actually go Cheating Technique rune. But either way, this stat is the least impactful one. Moving to the Headshot plus Eagle Eye build, you purely want rifle skills. The same as before, you max Fallen Angel and Bulletproof Armor. Now you also max Magic Bullet, and then level up Smoke Bomb to level 2 to 5 depending on your choice. In the Rebellion skill tree, you max your Crack Shot. This will be the basis for your Absolute Penetration's damage. Max Rifling Upgrade, of course. This skill will grant you more range, and the farther you fire your shot from, the more damage it does. Then, max your other buffs, and just ignore the grenade skills. So for the manual skill slot, like what I said, you want to have an offense set and a defense set. For initiation, it's either you scout with hiding from Smokey, if you have Moonlight Flower Star card, or you just use take cover and move along the edges. For auto skill slot, you may or may not put anything here. If you're the kind of player that doesn't want auto skills, in this build it's completely fine. For prepare for elite, be careful in using it since Rage of Tyrant has a long cooldown. The skills to prioritize the most are Absolute Penetration and Eagle Eye. Don't prioritize Force Dispel too much if your team relies on you for kills. So for the tips, I think the most important here is that you can use Fallen Angel to reposition yourself while Eagle Eye is active. When charging Absolute Penetration, having Take Cover on will be good since you will only be revealed for a brief moment after you fire your shot. When charging your shot, here are things to look out for. The first thing that can cancel your shot is if your target moves too far away. The second one is if your target goes invisible. The third one is if you get displaced while charging your shot. The last crucial tip for this build is to only use your Fire Rain when badly needed, since it has a fixed range of 6 meters, which will not be benefited by the rifling upgrade. As a demonstration, this is how it usually looks like for this build. So here our take cover is included in Prepare for Elite. We will be using it to scout for the enemy and to position ourselves. Now we cast Eagle Eye and charge our Absolute Penetration. Do mind that we get briefly revealed upon firing the shot. Also showcase here is the importance of Fallen Angel in repositioning while you're under Eagle Eye effect. For this build, it is also possible to use the Smoky card and Devil Squid card to position yourself while charging your shot. We can also use our Force Dispel as needed under the Eagle Eye effect. As a last choice, we can also use our Fire Rain. For the rune suggestions on this build, for Doomsday and Potent Hormone rune, is the same with the tank build. And then for Tactical Maneuver rune, you now prioritize the cooldown rather than move speed. Now we have cheating technique rune, prioritizing the first line for a more M attack and the third line so that the M attack buff is always present. And then storm tactics rune for those who do not have the Devil's Quid card. Last but not the least is Death's Glare Star rune. This will be the most important rune for this build. You have to prioritize second line for its range increase, and then the third line for the increased headshot chance. Now to the second version of build number 2, the low cooldown skill damage rifle build. The skills to level are the same with the previous one. For your manual slot, the only change is that you scrap Eagle Eye and have hiding and stealth in your offensive set. For the auto skill slot, having absolute penetration there is very comfortable. Now for prepare for elite, it's the same with the previous build, but with stealth as an addition. The skills to prioritize will now include Fire Rain, due to the build having a low cooldown and lots of mobility on its side. For the tips, you can pause the video if you want to read them all. The most important tips for this build is that take cover isn't that necessary anymore, since you will be moving a lot more and won't be confined to the edges. With this build, we can output a barrage of Fire Rain since the cooldown is very low, and that the bullet capacity won't matter since we're using the Fire and Fall power rune and we won't be consuming any bullets. As a demonstration, this is how it usually looks like for this build. Use Smoke Bomb or Hiding for your initiation. Then use Prepare for Elite and Stealth before outputting your damage. Actually, you can put your stuff in your Prepare for Elite for this build. As an alternative, you can also do a barrage of Fire Rains due to the very low cooldown. For the rune suggestions on this build, it's exactly the same with the previous one. You just have to change Death's Glare Star rune into Fire and Full Power rune, and the Stormtroop Tactics rune into Flight Fire Shooting Star rune. The logic for getting the Flight Fire Shooting Star rune is actually to synergize with the Fire Rain skill and not with the rifle skills. Now we move on to the pistol builds. For abnormal status build, same as before, you max Fallen Angel and Bulletproof Armor. You get 2 to 5 levels of Smoke Bomb, and then you max Pistol Mastery. For the Rebellion skill, just like the other builds, you always max out Magazine Expansion. Since Desperado will be the basis for Carnage Capoeira's damage, you max it out too. Then also take Debilitating Shot. After that, you take the buffs like Take Cover and Two-Sided Coin. And then the rest of the skills are up to you. Like Blood Brand, it's just optional. For the manual skill slot, same setup as before. We have a defensive set and an offensive set. For my offensive set, I have Hiding on manual, which I usually use for scouting. I also have Adrenaline and Fire and Full Power on manual as a means to monitor the cooldowns. This also means that I can also manually use the said skills if needed. For the auto skill, you may or may not put anything here. You can put Desperado, Blood Brand, or Bounty, depending on you. For the Prepare for Elite, emphasis on being careful for the cooldowns of Rage of Tyrant and Fire on Full Power. You can also play Stealth here if you have Devil's Quid card and use the Prepare for Elite just before you dive in. So for this build, the prioritized skills are a combination of Fire Rain and Carnage Capoeira. Now you can pause the video here and read all the tips for this build. The important ones to remember is to combo your Fire Rain with your Carnage Capoeira to maximize your DPS. In some cases, going straight to Carnage is warranted, especially if the enemies are scattered. What you want to do in these kinds of situations is to be at the center of your enemies. In that way, you can hit them all at once. A trick that I sometimes do is I put my Desperado on my auto slot
And then if the situation arises where an enemy is vulnerable to getting bursted, I turn on my auto and just dive in with Fallen Angel like this.
As a demonstration, this is how it usually looks like for this build.
I put my stealth skill in Prepare for Elite. Then I scout the enemy with hiding. Once I found my enemy, I will use my Prepare for Elite. Go in first with Fire Rain, and then Fallen Angel, and then Carnage Capiora. Putting Desperado on auto slot is just optional. Now let's talk a bit about Fight Fire Shooting Star runes. So I cast Fire Rain far away, but the Fight Fire Shooting Star runes range is based on where my character is, like so. Then now let's check the AoE of Carnage Capoeira. So we're hitting the first two dummies to our left and right, but the Fight Fire Shooting Star rune has a bigger range than Carnage Capoeira, like so.
For the rune suggestions on this build, it's mostly the same with the Doomsday Fire Rain rune, the Potent Hormone rune, and the Fire on Full Power rune with the other builds. For the Tactical Maneuver rune, emphasis on the second line rather than the first line, since you don't have cooldown reductions from your items. And then now let's talk about the Massacre Bloom rune, a Desperado specific rune. So you prioritize unlocking the third line, and then the first and the second line comes next. Both lines are also very important. Last but not least, on the Flight Fire Shooting Star rune, the most important here is to get a good first line and unlock the third line. For damage purposes, you also need to prioritize your second line. A quick demonstration on the limitations of homing missile from Flight Fire Shooting Star rune. This is from the perspective of my target. I cast Fire Rain rune just outside of range and let the Flight Fire Shooting Star rune hit the target. So the damage you see here is from the homing missiles only, and you can see that there are no abnormal statuses or even the breaking of items that is happening. Also with Carnage Capiora outside of the range. My target went inside the AoE of the Fire Rain, and as we can see here, the target got his items destroyed and also got debuffed with Bleed. From the short demo, we can conclude that the homing missile doesn't proc any abnormal statuses or even destroy equipment.
Moving on now to the last of the suggested builds. My favorite build as of late, especially in guild versus guild setting. So for skill to level, it's sort of the same with the fourth build we discussed. The difference here is on the Desperado skill, since you won't be using Carnage Capoeira as much. You can put on skills on Grenade Launcher if you don't really plan on using Desperado in any way. For the manual skill slot, you can notice that it's the same with the previous build, just that on the offensive set, instead of having Carnage Capoeira, we just put our Prepare for Elite there to have an easier access. If you plan on using Carnage Capiora in certain cases, just remove the Prepare for Elite. For auto skill slot, you can put Bounty here, or if you're not fond of manually casting your Fire Rain, you can also put your Fire Rain here on auto. For Prepare for Elite, the same considerations with the build number 4. And then the skills to prioritize on this build is just Fire Rain, and Fire Rain. You can pause the video right here and read all the tips for this build. The most important tips on this build is to prioritize the Fire Rain skill more than anything else. It is a good source of damage as shown on this comparison video between this build and the previous one. We check our dummy and make it mimic the scenario for PvP with a dummy strength of 90%. First, we'll do the combo for the Abnormal Satos build without cooldowns. So go Fire Rain first and then go in with Carnage Capoeira. The peak DPS I saw was about 3.7 million. Now let's change our gears for the Endless Fire Rain build. we get some buffs from our SA, especially the Suffragium. Please do note that the previous scenario also had buffs. And then we use our Prepare for Elite and just go all the way with Fire Rain. So the highest DPS I saw was 4.5 million. This build has an even higher DPS than the previous build. It's just that you have to predict your enemy's movement, and you also can't expect that the target will be stationary like this dummy. In other words, it's harder to use, especially if you have very mobile enemies.
As a demonstration, this is how it usually looks like for this build.
You scout with hiding or smoke bomb, and use bounty from time to time. And thus use your Prepare for Elite and go Fire Rain all the way. For the rune suggestions, it's mostly the same with the previous pistol build for Potent Hormone, Tactical Maneuver, and Fire on Full Power rune. A special consideration for this build is that in Doomsday Fire Rain rune, it's an emphasis to have high damage in your first line and high damage in the second line, actually the second line of the Flight Fire Shooting Star rune. Another change is to have Fatal Shot Order Star rune instead of the Massacre Bloom rune for this build. But if you have a plan to use Carnage Capoeira from time to time, the Massacre Bloom rune is also good since it has a Desperado on Fallen Angel. Next, we'll talk about what element converter to use for your Gunslinger. So first off, for Mystic Frozen, this is suggested for the Endless Fire Rain build. Since your only skill, Fire Rain, is Forced Fire, which means you can't convert it to other elements, you expect your enemy to use Pasana against you. They will turn their armor into fire type. So you use Mystic Frozen to convert your homing missile of your Fire Shooting Star rune into water element. The weakness to this is that water conversion on their part, on the part of the enemy, will counter both your Fire Rain and your converted water element on homing missile. Next, for Great Nature, a very popular converter. This is suggested for Abnormal Status build. Since wind element skills are popular from other classes, you use this as you predict the enemy to convert your armor to wind property with Dokkaebi card. So the weakness of this is that fire armor conversion counters both fire from Fire Rain and earth element with your converter. For Flame Heart, I think the only scenario where this converter is good is if you're using the Heart of Molten Fire ancient accessory. It means that both your Carnage Capoeira and other skills will have fire element, the same with your Fire Rain. Now its weakness is that it's countered by both water and fire armor conversion, and it is very unlikely for players to use earth armor, so you won't be expecting to do much amplified damage all the time. Lastly, for Rough Wind, the only advantage I see to it is that it has no penalty against fire armor conversion, which is also very common. The weaknesses to it is that it is countered by both wind and earth armor conversion, and then wind armor conversion for people who are fond of PvP is very common, and it is also unlikely for players to use water armor, so you don't expect to amplify your damage. Now let's have a brief discussion on skill particulars so that you know what to look out for. So for cast delay, execution and Platinum Era has a 2-second cast delay. On the flip side, we have 0.3 seconds of cast delay for both hiding and stealth. Please do mind that Bulletproof Armor and Two-Sided Coin has a variable cast time. This means if you're debuffed by a spell that increases cast time, you will find yourself casting the spell instead of having it casted instantly. Also note that Force Dispel and Crack Shot has a fixed cast time even though it's not written in the description in-game. Now for range, I highlighted how long range Fallen Angel and Bounty debuff is. For mana cost, especially in Magic Prison 6 vs 6, it is important to note that Fire on Full Power skill has a huge mana cost. This means that you have to be careful with your mana, especially if your build relies on Fire on Full Power. For the Execution skill, it has a ridiculous mana cost, and together with its huge cast delay, I don't really advise using this skill in any scenario. For cooldown, as what I've mentioned on the tips, be careful in using skills with big cooldowns as you may get in a situation where you're not prepared. Please do note that the cooldown of Adrenaline cannot be reduced in any way. Now we have come to the final part of the comprehensive PvP guide. Let's summarize things up by talking about the pros and cons of the different suggested builds. For the pros of the Tank Reflect low cooldown build, Reflect works well against squishy DPS classes like Ninjas, Slayers, Stellar Hunters, or other fellow Gunslingers. This build is the tankiest of all the builds, which means you will survive longer. Skills used synergize as well with other classes, and the 20 bullet capacity also means you are free to use skills more and have more layers on Platinum Era. Incorporating abnormal status effects on enemies with the addition of low cooldown skills is very effective. The cons is that you just don't get any kills and can be ignored as a damage source. For the skill damage headshot plus Eagle Eye rifle build, the pros is that you have a potential to kill any enemy, no matter how tanky he or she is. A charge shot also has the highest single instance damage. When you use the Eagle Eye buff, the map view is also widened. With the right strategy, you can snipe your enemies from a safe distance. The cons for this build is that it's very static, especially when you're using Eagle Eye. If the enemy can see you, especially with True Sight Relic, you're good as dead. There are also many ways to cancel a charging shot from the enemy's end. Since we rely on the luck stat for yourself and pray that the luck stat of your enemy is low, it makes the build quite unreliable. Another con is that Fire Rain will take up half of our bullet capacity if we cast it. Lastly, since our main damage skill, Absolute Penetration, is force neutral, it can easily be countered with cards. For the low cooldown skill damage rifle build, it's a versatile mix of AoE and single target, with higher DPS than the previous build, but still having the safety of sniping from a distance. Having high mobility and low cooldowns will also mean that you are harder target and also more efficient. Since rifle skills and Fire Rain does not get affected by the Agi stat, this is my suggested build for MP Season 11 in preparation for the Forced Bulwark MP skill. The cons to the build is the same with the previous one. Your main skill is force neutral and your Fire Rain is forced fire. You can be easily countered by a change in element. By the way, the 8 bullet capacity is not actually a con since Fire and Full Power covers this. For the abnormal status pistol build, this was the popular build in MP Season 9 and Season 10 of Eternal Love server. For its pros, it's the highest DPS potential for scattered or moving targets. It is very disruptive with the use of abnormal status effects. It is highly mobile and you can cycle through 2 AoE spells to cover more ground. This build is also element converter friendly, allowing you to be more flexible. Now for the cons, you may have some cooldown issues with the build. Sometimes you'll find yourself doing nothing in between skills. Also, you rely on your abnormal status to proc. This means if your enemy has high resistances or immunities, your damage will suffer. And then lastly, you also have a smaller bullet count with Golden Law Enforcer compared to equipping Inferno Pistol. Now for my last suggested build, the Endless Fire Rain Pistol build. It has the highest damage potential for stationary or slow moving targets. It is also very disruptive like the last build. It's slightly harder to kill since Inferno Pistol has a damage to demi-human Redux component, and you also have more layers of Platinum Era. It synergizes well with other classes, specifically with the use of Bounty. It does not rely on Agi for damage with the Fire Rain skill. which may counteract the Frost Bulwark MP skill that's coming. You also won't have any problems with cooldown. And of course, it has a very high mobility. For the cons, it's the same with the previous build. It relies on abnormal Satos to proc to increase damage. A big limitation is having your main skill, Fire Rain, being forced fire. Moving targets, especially in the Wolf Arena or Magic Prison setting, are hard to kill, and that you need more reliance on seeing your target first compared to Carnage Capoeira, where you can spray an area and the AoE of your skill goes along with your character. So for me, this build is the best for GVG setting. For MP, this build can also be viable, but you need to incorporate your Carnage Capoeira from time to time. So that's all for my comprehensive guide, guys. I hope this has helped you in one way or the other. If you have any corrections or suggestions, please do comment them down below. Apologies again for taking too long for me to complete this video. The sheer volume of work to do for the video, coupled with being busy in real life, really held me back. If you appreciate me making these videos, please subscribe to my channel as I'm trying to get to 1 million subscribers. Leave a like and comment if you want me to do future comprehensive videos for upcoming classes. See you in the next video.